non-essential personnel. He said it without looking at her. He said it the way a man says the word paperwork, or maintenance, or any other category of thing that exists only to slow down the important work being done by important people. He was already moving on to the next item on his clipboard before the words had finished leaving his mouth. She picked up her coffee cup. She walked to the corridor, and the most dangerous analyst in the Fifth Fleet sat down on a plastic chair outside the door and waited. 90 minutes later, every alarm on the threat board was screaming. And the lieutenant was about to learn what happens when you file away the only person in the room who knows what the noise means. My name is Old Bill. I tell stories about the quiet ones, the ones who never need to say who they are, the ones who already know. This is one of those stories. July 2026, Bahrain. The sun outside Fifth Fleet headquarters does not so much rise as detonate. By 6 in the morning, the air is already thick and bright and punishing, the kind of heat that reminds you the Gulf does not care who you are or what you carry on your collar. Inside the building, it is different. Inside, it is cool and humming, the permanent artificial dusk of a facility that never sleeps, never fully powers down, that runs around the clock because the water it overlooks does not pause for shift change or weekend or holiday. The headquarters building of Naval Forces Central Command sits on the northern tip of Bahrain, a structure that looks from the outside like every other gray institutional building the United States military has ever constructed anywhere in the world. Functional, anonymous, understated in the specific way that only buildings holding extraordinary amounts of lethal decision-making power can afford to be. There is nothing on the exterior that tells you what happens inside. There is nothing that needs to. Everyone in the Gulf who matters already knows. Inside, on the third floor, the Fleet Intelligence Watch section occupies a long rectangular room that its regular occupants call the tank. It is not a name on any placard or in any official designation. It is simply what the people who live in it call it, the way soldiers name every space they inhabit for long enough, giving it a shape and a personality and a word that belongs only to those who have spent enough hours there to earn the right to use it. The tank runs 24 hours. It always has. In the current operational climate, with U.S. strike packages against Iranian military facilities entering their fourth week and documented Irgich drone and missile exchanges accumulating at a pace that had most of the watch section working double rotations, it runs 24 hours with an intensity that pushes up against the limits of what sustained human attention can maintain. The screens never go dark. The feeds never stop. The coffee machine in the corner alcove has been replaced twice in 6 months. She had brought her own coffee cup. This was one of the first things anyone who worked in the tank noticed about her, if they noticed her at all. It was a plain paper cup, the kind from any coffee shop anywhere in any city, refilled from the carafe in the corner. She did not have a mug with a unit insignia. She did not have a travel thermos with a name tag. She had a paper cup, and she refilled it herself, and she sat at the second station from the left on the far side of the room, and she worked. Her name was Catherine Reeves. She was 47 years old. She wore no uniform. Her contractor badge was blue, which placed her in the category of cleared civilian technical support, a designation that to the untrained eye suggested someone who kept the computer systems running or managed the classified filing protocols. She wore plain clothes, a collared shirt the color of ash, dark slacks, shoes with no particular character. Her hair was pulled back without vanity or style. She wore no jewelry except a small watch on her left wrist, the kind with a plain face and a leather strap, the kind that tells you the time and nothing else. She was not, at first glance, the kind of person you would stop to look at twice. She was not, at any subsequent glance, the kind of person who would invite you to revise that first impression. She did not perform. She did not announce herself. She sat at her station, and she worked. And the work she did was so far above the comprehension of most people in the building that the gap between what she saw and what they saw might as well have been measured in miles. 14 years. That was how long she had been on the Gulf desk. Not 14 years of service in the broad, diffuse sense of an organization. 14 years of this specific corridor of the world, of this water, of the particular way that signals emerge and travel and mean things across the Eastern Gulf. She had started in a different building, in a different capacity, with a different set of tools, and a database that was a fraction of what she had built it into. She had built most of it herself. The pre-strike emissions signature library that was currently loaded in every ship's combat system on the Fifth Fleet blockade line, the one that fed the threat classification algorithm that the watch section ran against every anomalous reading that came in. The one that the duty officers consulted as a matter of course every time something appeared on the board that did not immediately sort itself into a known category. That library had her name on it, in the internal documentation, in the technical appendices, in the acknowledgments buried at the end of classified reports that almost nobody read. Nobody in the tank, on the morning of July 15th, had read those acknowledgments. Nobody except the fleet intelligence officer, Captain Harold Merrick, who was not currently in the tank. He was 2 floors up in a meeting with the Commodore and would not return for 2 hours. He was the one person in the building who knew, without any ambiguity or qualification, exactly what Catherine Reeves represented. He had told his watch officers. He had told them in the way that senior officers tell junior officers things that they want taken seriously, but that junior officers, in the flush of their own competence and the confidence of their rank, sometimes receive as advisory rather than mandatory. The incoming duty lieutenant had not taken it seriously enough. His name was Lieutenant James Calloway, and he was 28 years old. And he had come up through a pipeline that rewarded certainty and speed and the appearance of decisive control. He was, by the metrics his training had given him, very good at his job. He was fast. He was organized. He could run a watch section through a high-tempo cycle with an efficiency that impressed the people above him. He had a quality that some people in his environment mistook for leadership. A kind of forceful confidence that expanded to fill whatever room he walked into, that made other people defer to him before he had done anything in particular to earn the deference. He had walked into the tank at 05:45 that morning, done a sweep of the room with the efficiency of a man who has spent his life being right about rooms, and started his watch changeover. He had seen Catherine Reeves at the second station from the left. He had not recognized her. He had seen her badge color, blue, civilian technical support. He had pulled up the active watch roster on his tablet, the personnel list for the current high-threat cycle, the list that designated which bodies in the room were essential and which were administrative or support functions that could be redistributed during elevated watch conditions. He had a protocol for this. The protocol existed for good reasons, real operational security reasons, about limiting the number of non-cleared for current operations individuals present during active threat assessment cycles. He had applied the protocol. He had applied it incorrectly. Because Catherine Reeves's clearance level was not what her badge color suggested. Her clearance level was, in fact, higher than his. Her access to the current operational picture was not adjacent to the watch section's work. It was foundational to it. But the protocol was the protocol, and the lieutenant ran the protocol, and the protocol said that blue badge contractors not on the specific current operations roster should be directed to wait in the corridor during elevated watch cycles. And Catherine Reeves was not on the specific current operations roster because her contract was administered through a different directorate, and the paperwork that should have put her name on that list had been delayed by 48 hours in a system that was running slightly behind on account of the same operational tempo that was pushing the watch section to its limits. 48 hours. The distance between being on the list and not being on the list. The distance, as it would turn out, between two very different kinds of mourning. The lieutenant had crossed the room to her station. He had looked at her badge. He had looked at her screen, which showed a display she had been building for the past 4 hours, a visualization of emission pattern data from the Eastern Gulf, cross-referenced against her own signature library in a way that was, had anyone in the room understood what they were looking at, quite alarming. He had not understood what he was looking at. "Ma'am," he had said, using the word in the specific way that professional hierarchy uses it when it does not mean respect, but rather category. "I need to ask you to step into the corridor. We're running an elevated watch protocol, and I need to limit active floor access to the current operations roster." She had looked at him, not with anger, not with indignation, with a look that contained, if you knew how to read it, a very precise quality of assessment, the same quality she applied to the data on her screen. She was looking at him the way she looked at a new emissions pattern, cataloging what she saw, filing it. "I'm in the middle of something," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. It did not rise in protest or drop in intimidation. It stated a fact. "I understand that," the lieutenant said, and the word understand in his mouth meant the opposite of what it was supposed to mean. "But I have an active watch protocol to manage. I'm going to need you to wait outside until I can verify your roster status. For security reasons." He was already turning away when he said the last part, already moving to the next item on his mental clipboard, already in the next moment of an efficiently managed watch change. She looked at the screen. She looked at it for 3 seconds, the kind of 3 seconds that contain more information than most people process in an afternoon. She saved her work. She picked up her coffee cup. She stood up. "All right," she said. She walked to the door. She walked through it. She sat down on the plastic chair in the corridor outside the tank, and she held her paper coffee cup in both hands, and she waited. The morning moved through its normal rhythms. In the tank, the watch section settled into the elevated cycle with the practiced efficiency of a well-drilled team. The screens ran their feeds. The algorithms processed their data. The lieutenant managed his section with the crisp authority he had cultivated across 3 years of watch officer duty, and it looked, from inside the room, like competence in full operation. In the corridor, Catherine Reeves refilled her coffee cup once. She sat with her hands folded in her lap. She looked at the wall across from her, which was the color of institutional gray and contained a motivational poster about the Navy's core values and a framed photograph of the current fleet commander. She did not appear agitated. She did not appear offended. She appeared, to the one junior petty officer who passed her in the corridor and gave her a second glance, like someone who had learned to wait with a patience that went too deep to have any performance in it. She had been waiting for approximately 40 minutes when one of the junior analysts inside the tank, a young intelligence specialist named Petty Officer First Class Nathaniel Greer, picked up an anomalous reading on the Eastern Gulf feed and ran it through the classification algorithm. No match. He ran it again with slightly adjusted parameters. No match. He ran it with the broader variance settings that the algorithm allowed for possible signal degradation or deliberate signature masking. No match. He flagged it and pushed it to the senior analyst on watch, Chief Petty Officer Sandra Watkins, who had 11 years in the intelligence field and an instinct for this kind of data that had served the section well across a dozen prior watch cycles. She looked at it for 90 seconds. She pulled up the current IRGSIC exercise profiles. She compared the emissions pattern against the 3 most recently documented drone launch preparation signatures in the library. Not an exact match to any of them. Close in some parameters. Different in others. Different in ways that were systematic rather than random, which meant it was not noise, which meant it was something. She escalated to the lieutenant. The lieutenant looked at the board. He ran his own comparison. He was a competent officer, and he understood what the algorithm was telling him, which was that the board had something on it that it could not identify, and that the current operational environment made unidentifiable emissions in the Eastern Gulf a category of thing that required immediate and careful attention. He started working the problem. He pulled the duty electronics warfare officer into the loop. He got on the chat system and pushed the anomalous data to 2 other analysts in the building who had Gulf desk experience. He escalated upward and got a response from the Deputy Fleet Intelligence Officer, a commander who was technically off watch, but who was the senior person available while Captain Merrick was upstairs. Nobody had seen the specific pattern before. Not on this watch, not in recent memory. The algorithm had no match because the signature was new, or new enough that it had not been formally entered into the common library as a distinct category with a confirmed identification. What the algorithm could not tell them was that the signature was not, in fact, new. It had appeared before. 3 times, across a period of 22 months, in the pre-launch preparation period before 3 separate IRGS drone strike packages. It was in the database. It had been catalogued, documented, analyzed, and annotated by the person who had compiled the pre-launch signature library across 14 years of observing this water. It was in the library because she had put it there herself, sourced from raw signals data that she had pulled and processed after each of the 3 incidents, building the pattern identification from first principles because no prior documentation existed. But it was in an annex of the library that was accessed through a secondary classification node, one that had been built to her particular architecture and that the classification algorithm running on the watch section's current system had not been fully indexed against because the indexing update had been scheduled for the following week. The algorithm did not know about this signature because the algorithm had not yet been told. The only person in the building who would immediately recognize this specific emissions pattern, by sight, from memory, because she had cataloged it herself from 3 prior incidents that none of the current watch section analysts had worked, was sitting in the corridor with a paper coffee cup. It was Chief Petty Officer Greer who remembered. He had not been in the tank during any of the 3 prior incidents, but 4 months ago, during a transition briefing, he had sat in a room where Catherine Reeves had presented a technical update on her signature library, had shown slides with exactly this kind of pattern, had walked through the methodology she used to isolate and identify pre-launch indicators. He had been in the back of the room and had only half paid attention, the way junior analysts sometimes sit in briefings given by someone with a quiet voice and a blue badge and no rank insignia, but some fragment of it had stayed with him. He thought of it now because the pattern on the board looked, in some quality he could not have precisely articulated, like the patterns she had shown on those slides. He turned to the lieutenant. "Sir," he said, "there was an analyst here earlier, the contractor. She was doing something with the Eastern Gulf feed when I came in this morning." The lieutenant looked at him. "The one you had wait outside?" Greer said. The room was quiet, in the specific way a room gets quiet when several people realize simultaneously that something important is happening. "She flagged something similar," Greer said. "Before the last confirmed launch, she submitted a report. I remember because the pattern looked like what she showed in a briefing I sat in." He paused. I think she might have seen this before. The lieutenant held a beat of stillness, the kind of stillness that a trained watch officer maintains, because training has told him that stillness is more productive than reaction, but that in this case contained, if you were watching carefully, a hairline crack of something that was not quite certainty anymore. He turned to Chief Watkins. "Get her," he said. She was still on the plastic chair. Chief Watkins opened the door to the corridor and found her exactly where the lieutenant had left her, sitting with the same stillness, holding the same cup, looking at the same wall. She looked up when the door opened, and her expression did not change in the way a person's expression changes when they have been vindicated and want the room to register it. She had no performance of vindication. She simply looked at Chief Watkins the way she looked at everything, with attention, steady and full and recording. "Ma'am," Watkins said, "the lieutenant is asking if you can come back in." Catherine Reeves stood up. She did not say anything. She walked back through the door. The watch section watched her cross the room to the threat board. She stopped in front of it. She looked at the display. She looked at it for 40 seconds. Nobody in the room spoke. The screens ran their feeds. The cooling system hummed in the walls. Someone's coffee maker made a small noise, and then went quiet. 40 seconds. Then she spoke. "Eastern bearing," she said. Her voice was the same quiet, even register it had been when the lieutenant had told her to leave, consistent with the launch axis from the third incident in the series. Not a match to the standard exercise profiles because the ERGs shifted their pre-launch signal architecture after the second package. They changed the transmission interval. Standard algorithm is looking for the old interval. This is the new one. She turned to the lieutenant. "Bearing 275 magnetic from the coastal profile. Launch window I would estimate 40 to 60 minutes from first emissions detection. First emissions were 43 minutes ago, based on when that reading came in." She glanced at Greer. "Was that when you first picked it up?" "Yes, ma'am," Greer said. 0812. She turned back to the board. "So you're inside the window, possibly well inside it. The second incident in the series had a 19-minute interval between this emissions phase and first radar acquisition of launch vehicles. The third had 23 minutes. She paused. "I would recommend repositioning the SM-2 battery to the northwest quadrant now. The inbound package, if the pattern holds, will be on a compressed angle of approach that puts the standard battery position at a geometry disadvantage." They adjusted their attack corridor after the first two intercepts. She said it the way she had said everything, without urgency, without the kind of escalating tone that fear uses to signal its own presence. She said it like a person reading a map and describing what is on it, because to her it was a map, one she had drawn herself from 14 years of watching this water. The room needed 3 seconds to catch up. The lieutenant needed 4. Then he was on the radio. "If you feel that the stories of quiet professionals, the ones who built the systems and wrote the libraries and know the patterns that no one else knows, if those stories deserve to be told, you can help keep this channel going on Patreon. The link is right there in the description. Now back to the tank." The SM-2 battery repositioned. The watch section sent the updated threat parameters to the ships on the blockade line. The communications loop ran at the specific controlled pace of people who have trained for exactly this kind of moment, who have run the drills until the drill is faster than thought. 31 minutes after Catherine Reeves returned to the room, the radar arrays on the line acquired the first launch signatures. The package was real, 4 vehicles. The angle of approach was within 8 degrees of the bearing she had given them. The intercepts were clean. She watched it on the board with the same expression she had brought back through the door with her, the one that had no performance in it, that simply watched and recorded. When the confirmation came in, she made a note in the file she had been building when the lieutenant had asked her to leave. She added the current incident to the series documentation. She updated the timestamp column. She cross-referenced the interval against the prior 3. She was making the next person's job easier. She was already building the next version of the library. She refilled her coffee cup. Captain Harold Merrick came back into the tank at 10:47. He had been in the Commodore's meeting when the intercepts happened. He had received the notification through the command channel and had reviewed the initial incident report on his way back down the stairs. He was a man of 53, with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades in this work, who have seen enough to know what significance looks like and what it sounds like, and, critically, what it feels like in a room after it has already happened. He walked into the tank. He read the room. He looked at the board. He looked at Catherine Reeves at the second station from the left, refilling her coffee. He looked at the duty officer's incident log. He found the entry that logged the action to wait the blue badge contractor in the corridor during the elevated watch cycle. He looked at the timestamp. He looked at the timestamp on the first anomalous emissions reading. He looked at the interval. He understood what had happened. He moved to the center of the room. He did it with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who is about to do something that the room needs to witness, who understands that the value of the moment lies as much in the telling as in the content, because rooms like this one pass things down through their personnel, and what gets passed down shapes what comes next, and what comes next in this room, on this water, in this work, matters in ways that extend beyond any single watch cycle or any single morning's decisions. He picked up the contractor dossier that was standard documentation for every cleared civilian working in the tank. He opened it to the first page. He read it aloud. His voice was not loud. He did not need volume. The room was already quiet in the way it gets when a senior officer establishes the quality of attention he requires without asking for it. Catherine Ann Reeves, he said. Current assignment, Gulf Desk Analytical Support, Naval Forces Central Command, on rotating contract. Prior assignment, Defense Intelligence Agency, Gulf Regional Analysis Branch, 6 years. Prior to that, National Security Agency, Signals Intelligence Division, Gulf Desk, 4 years. Prior to that, Naval Intelligence, 5th Fleet Forward Analytical Cell, Bahrain, 4 years. He turned a page. Primary area of expertise, Irgirk, Naval and Air Operations, Signals Intelligence, Pre-Strike Emission Pattern Identification. Subject matter contributor to Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center Threat Assessment Curriculum, 2021, 2022, 2024. Author, Gulf Threat Emissions Signature Library, currently loaded in the combat systems of every surface combatant on the 5th Fleet blockade line. He paused. He let that last sentence stand in the air for a moment, because it required standing, because the room needed to fully understand what it meant before he continued. Author of the database, he said again quietly, not a user of it, not a trained user of it, the person who built it, from source data, over 14 years, that is who was asked to wait in the corridor. The room was very quiet. Captain Merrick closed the dossier. He looked at the watch section. He looked at each face in turn, the specific kind of professional look that is not angry but is absolutely clear, that does not require any additional words to communicate what it means, that the people who receive it will remember for the rest of their careers. He looked last at Lieutenant Calloway. The lieutenant was standing at his station with the posture of a person who is maintaining their bearing as a matter of training rather than as a matter of conviction, because the conviction has left the room. His face was the particular color of a person who has understood with complete and terrible clarity the exact nature of what they have done. not an approximation of it. The exact nature, the specific weight of a specific action on a specific morning that had a specific consequence that could have been a different kind of consequence entirely, the kind you cannot call back or correct or document your way out of. He held his bearing. He had the discipline for that. "Lieutenant," Captain Merrick said, "you will have a written statement on my desk by 1600 summarizing your protocol decision this morning, the information available to you at the time of the decision, and your assessment of the outcome." "Aye, sir," the lieutenant said. "You will also," Merrick continued, "review the contractor clearance documentation for every non-uniformed analyst on your watch roster before your next duty rotation. All of them. Personally. You will sign each one." "Aye, sir." Merrick nodded. The nod meant the conversation on this topic, in this form, was finished. He did not add to it. He did not underline it. The room had understood. The lieutenant had understood. The moment had done what it needed to do. He turned to Catherine Reeves. She had been at her station the entire time. She had not turned around when he started reading. She had continued her work, the steady, methodical documentation that she brought to everything, because the work was the work, and it did not pause for the theater of its own acknowledgement. She turned now. He held her gaze. Senior officers develop a specific kind of look for moments like this one, something that carries weight without performance, that honors without condescending, that acknowledges without making the object of acknowledgement into an object. He had the look. He had earned it over 30 years of this work. He said, "Thank you." That was all. 2 words. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, the same economy she brought to everything, and turned back to her screen. Merrick looked at the room one more time. Then he walked to his office. The written statement the lieutenant submitted at 15:58 that afternoon was, by all internal accounts, a document of remarkable precision and painful clarity. He had written it the way he did everything, efficiently, without evasion, because whatever his failures of judgment that morning had been, he was not the kind of person who compounded them with dishonesty. He accounted for every decision. He accounted for the protocol he applied, and the information he had, and the information he had not sought. He used the words insufficient due diligence, and he meant them. And the fact that he meant them was, in some sense, the only thing working in his favor. The statement went to Captain Merrick. Then it went to the Deputy Fleet Commander. Then it went, as documents of this nature sometimes do when they acquire a particular instructional weight, into a process that had several steps and several reviewers and several conversations in offices that Lieutenant Calloway was not present for, conversations about operational culture and institutional blind spots and the particular risks that occur when the visible markers of authority become confused with the actual distribution of expertise in a high-stakes environment. The process was not fast. It was not dramatic. It did not arrive with the blunt finality of a public censure or a formal relieving of duty. It arrived, over the following weeks, as a series of administrative realities that amounted to the same thing by a different path. The duty officer rotation he had been slated for at the end of the month was reassigned. The accelerated promotion board that his record had positioned him for was delayed. He was transferred to a staff position in Bahrain's administrative directorate, a position that involved no watch duties, no active threat assessment cycles, no decisions of the kind he had made that morning. He was not broken by it. He was, in the way that certain kinds of people can be, reshaped by it. Those who worked with him in the years that followed noted a quality in him that had not been there before, a carefulness about assumption, a habit of verification before action, a way of pausing before he categorized anyone or anything that suggested he had learned, at real cost, what the cost of premature categorization could be. He became, in time, a better officer. Not the officer he had been on the morning of July 15th, but a better one, the kind of officer who reads the contractor clearance documentation, the kind who knows the name of the analyst at the second station from the left. There are worse ways to learn. There are worse teachers. He never forgot the look on Captain Merrick's face when he read the dossier. He told one person about it, years later, a young lieutenant who was about to take their first watch officer duty in a high-stakes intelligence environment. He told them the story the way cautionary stories get told when the person telling them has earned the right to tell them from the inside, without embellishment, without the softening that distance sometimes grants. He told them, verify. Before anything else, verify. Not the badge color, the person. In the tank, the morning of July 15th eventually became part of the unofficial curriculum that the section passed on to its people. Not formally. There was no training module, no official case study, no policy memorandum that cited the incident by date or name. The formal documentation existed in the records that Merrick's statement generated, but formal documentation is for the institution. What the watch section passed on was something that traveled differently, person to person, rotation to rotation, the way that the real knowledge of a place always travels. It traveled as a story about a woman with a paper coffee cup, as a story about a chair in a corridor, and a threat-board screaming, and a 40-second silence during which one person looked at the data and saw what everyone else in the room could not see, because no one else in the room had spent 14 years building the vocabulary to read it. It traveled as a story with a lesson in it, the lesson that the Gulf Desk people told new arrivals, with a specific kind of directness, not as parable or abstraction, but as operational fact. The lesson was this, that in an environment of genuine complexity and genuine consequence, the correlation between visible authority and actual competence is not as strong as it looks. The rank says what the system decided to give someone at a point in time. The badge color says what administrative category a contract was filed under. Neither one tells you what the person knows. Neither one tells you what they've seen. Neither one tells you who built the database that the whole room is running on. You verify, you ask. You look past the surface of things to the thing itself, because in this work, the surface of things is not the thing, and confusing one for the other has consequences that the morning of July 15th had demonstrated with the specific, terrible clarity of a real incident on a real watch in a real operational environment, where the consequences of a different outcome would have been measured in something other than careers. Catherine Reeves heard parts of this story later, from people who had been in the tank that morning and who had the particular quality of honesty that makes someone tell you what you already know without expecting gratitude for the telling. She received it the same way she received most things, with attention and without theater. She did not find it particularly remarkable that the story was being told. Stories told themselves when they had enough weight. This one had weight. She was back at her station the morning after it happened, at the second desk from the left, with a new paper cup. She had updated the signature library with the current incident, had integrated the bearing data and the launch interval and the adjusted attack corridor geometry into the pattern documentation so that the next analyst who encountered a similar reading would have a better map than she had been given. She had written a technical note on the indexing gap between her library's secondary node and the current classification algorithm, had flagged it for the systems team, had suggested a specific correction that would close the gap before the next update cycle. She had done this on the afternoon of July 15th, before she left for the day, before the first version of the story about the paper coffee cup had made it to the end of the corridor. She was not someone who waited for the work to be acknowledged before she continued doing it. The acknowledgement was not the point. It had never been the point. The point was the water, and what moved across it, and the patterns that emerged and meant things if you knew how to read them, and the next person who would need to read them, and the library she was building to help them do it. She had been building it for 14 years. She had a lot more building to do. There is a particular kind of person who arrives at a level of mastery so deep that it loses its need for performance. The early stages of mastery perform. They have to, because the world does not automatically trust competence it has not yet witnessed, and so the competent must sometimes advertise what they are. But the deep stages, the stages that come from 14 years of doing one specific thing at the highest possible level, from building the tools that everyone else runs on, from having seen things that nobody else has seen and documented them so that the knowledge does not die with the experience, those stages do not perform. They wait, they work. They pick up their coffee cup and sit in the corridor and watch the wall, and when the door opens, they walk back in and look at the board for 40 seconds and give you the bearing and the window and the intercept geometry. And then they refill their cup and update the database. The world is full of people who announce themselves, who wear their credentials on the outside, who make sure you know who you are dealing with before you have to ask. They are not the most dangerous people in the room. They are rarely the most knowledgeable people in the room, the most dangerous people in the room, the most knowledgeable, the ones the whole operation is quietly running on, are often the ones you have to look twice to see. The ones whose expertise is structural rather than visible. The ones who built the thing you are standing on and will still be building the next version of it after you have forgotten their name. She submitted a written report before the last drone launch. It was filed as speculative, insufficient precedent. She had known it would be. She filed it anyway because the work is the work, and the work does not depend on whether the filing system is adequate to receive it. You build the record. You maintain the record. You update the record with the new incident. You make the next library better than the last one. Whether anyone reads the annotations is not your problem. Your problem is that the annotations are accurate. Your problem is that when the door opens again, you know what to say. The most dangerous assumption in any high-stakes environment is the assumption that the category tells you the person, that the badge says the competence, that the rank tells you the knowledge, that the visible credential maps perfectly onto the invisible substance. It is a natural assumption. It is an efficient assumption. In most ordinary circumstances, it is a harmless assumption. In extraordinary circumstances, on extraordinary mornings, with the Eastern Gulf running emissions patterns that do not match the current exercise library, it is the assumption that puts the author of the database in the corridor and the people who need the database in the room without her. The watch sections at Fifth Fleet still talk about July 15th. They talk about it the way professionals in a field talk about the incident that changed the protocol, that made the regulation, that rewrote the checklist. They talk about it as the morning the algorithm could not match the pattern. They talk about it as the morning the intercepts were clean. The ones who were there talk about it differently. They talk about it as the morning of the paper coffee cup, the morning of the plastic chair, the morning of 40 seconds of silence in front of the threat board, and one voice, quiet and even, giving a bearing and a window and a recommendation that held. They talk about it when a new analyst arrives and takes their station for the first time and perhaps looks around the room with the natural, understandable, very human instinct to read the room by its visible surfaces. They pull them aside. They tell them, that person at the second station from the left, with the plain badge and the worn shoes and the paper coffee cup, before you categorize them, before you file them, before you decide what they are by what they look like, find out who built the database you are running on. It might be her. It is more often than you think. For more stories about the quiet ones, the builders and the watchers, the people the room was running on before anyone knew their name, subscribe to Old Bill's Tales. I will be here, telling these stories for as long as they deserve telling, which is for a very long time. And if you would like to help me keep telling them, my Patreon is linked in the description below. Thank you for standing with me. Old Bill, signing off.